Hello.
Hi.
Is there a count or anything to see how many people are tuned in right now?
Let me see. We have a few. So let's get started because I think we have a lot of really awesome questions.
Yeah.
And I don't want us to run out of time.
Okay, awesome. Well, to start off, I'm Christina. I'm the founder of Amplify Her Voice. We're an online platform dedicated to promoting equality in the music industry. Maggie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Maggie Arthur. I use she and they pronouns, and I am the campaign coordinator of the Our Music, My Body campaign that is housed within one of Chicago's largest serving rape crisis centers. And so naturally, we look at how to prevent gender-based violence in the music community.
Awesome. Who wants to go next? Mia?
Sure. So my name is Mia Van Allen. I'm the founder of the Color Music Collective, and what we do there is we amplify specifically POC and LGBTQ voices in the music industry, but specifically in the music business.
Awesome. Taylor?
My name's Taylor Testa. I am the co-chair of the She is the Music Songwriting Committee and the Los Angeles chapter. I also do A&R for Universal Publishing Group.
Awesome. Sorry, I'm going in order of my Zoom video. Let's see, Brit.
Hi, I'm Brit Julius. I am a music journalist as well as an essayist and a storyteller. I primarily write for the Chicago Tribune. I have a weekly column writing about music, about local music, about national music, international music, and then I freelance for a whole bunch of other places as well.
Amazing. And last but not least, Chissy, do you want to go?
Yep. Hi, I'm Chissy Nkemera, and I am the co-chair of Diversity Inclusion Council for Women in Music, and I also help lead streaming strategy and marketing for Concord, which is a record label.
Awesome. Okay, so to start off, we're going to go into what the topic of this panel is. And for this panel, we're going to discuss diversity and inclusion in the music industry, what we can do better, how we're going to enact lasting change when the music industry is back in full force. We'll be discussing how we can improve our music community as a whole beyond the coronavirus. I know personally, and of course with like all of my peers, coronavirus has impacted the music industry pretty drastically. It's been very devastating to this business. And we just want to make sure that when we return to music, to live music, to a full force music industry, we'll have a stronger foundation than we did before. So Maggie, you want to start off with the first few questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Christina. So we have a few questions that are going to be directed to specific individuals, and then we have a few that we want to open up to everybody. So I'm going to start out with Chissy. We know that you've been an activist for a really long time now. So what made you get involved with women in music, and specifically in this bigger topic of inclusivity in the music community?
Hi, that's a great question. So I'm obviously a Black woman who's working in music. I'm young. I started pretty early, and it's really diversity is obviously a big topic this year, but it's something that is an incredibly important part of not only the music industry, but every industry. But what we need to move past is the idea of diversity and just inclusion, and really figuring out how to amplify voices that are not often heard and seen throughout our industry. And it's something that's been super important to me, one, personally, but also just generally because not everyone has the access necessary in order to join and be a part of this industry. And it's really unfortunate knowing how much talent is out there, but isn't able to break in, may that be because of access or education or location or whatever it may be. And so it's kind of been, for the past however many years, a very important part of my life, working and personal, to try to break those barriers. So, with Women in Music, I joined last year. It kind of was on accident. I spoke at a diversity and inclusion panel at Mondo NYC, which is a convention or event that happens every year in New York. Obviously this year it was digital. And I met Nicole Barcelona, who's Women in Music's president, and she just reached out to me and was like, this is something we've been thinking about for a while, and I think you'd be a great voice to add into our organization. Please join. And we really have worked very hard, me and Nicole, and also my co-chair, Nikisha Bailey, who works at Atlantic, and the entire Diversity and Inclusion Council and the organization to try to actually make impact in the industry and to get toward a more equitable place, which is really necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've definitely seen the impacts of your work thus far, and I'm super stoked to see where you go from here. And on that note, do you want to talk a little more specifically about the blocks that are currently present to this notion of inclusive music communities?
Yeah, I'll first start with access. Everything in our society starts with education, early childhood education. And from the outset of our children and our communities, we're not really giving everyone the same opportunities for access. We're not saying, hey, there are careers in this industry for you. And that's the first, from when kids are 3 years old, that's the first barrier that they're given in joining any particular career. And so as kids get older and become young adults and figure out what they want to do, there's not always that openness or welcoming into an industry. And so, oftentimes that barrier can, keep people from joining our industry. So for example, education wise, right? A lot of people go to college and think they have to go to college in order to enter an industry. We don't need to go to college in order to join the music industry. And we have to kind of stop that notion that everyone has to have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree or a PhD to get to different parts of our industry, and that keeps people out. Number two, oftentimes when there are internships, they're unpaid in the music industry. And not everyone can afford to move to a New York or LA and work for free and find some way to sleep on someone's couch or pay rent or do that in order to just break through and meet people in the music industry, because we all know that a lot of rising in the ranks has to do with connections and has to do with who you know and who knows you. And obviously diversity is something that a lot of people are just educating themselves on now. This year has been a big lesson for a lot of people, understanding that there is a lot of racial strife still out there, but it's also been a lesson for people who are well aware of that so many people don't know just how bad it is, from the biggest extremes to the smallest extremes. And so, we also need to push past the notion that diversity just means one thing. It's not just racial. It's also about disability. It's also about religion. It's also about location. It's also about, sexual orientation. And we need to push past and understand that everyone not only needs to be welcomed in, but we need to amplify those voices and to stop using connections as the main way to hiring people and giving them opportunities in our industry. It really keeps incredible people out. And just basic economics 101, you are most profitable and you have better business strategy the more diverse thought you have. And thought that comes from different types of people and where they are, how they were raised, their immigration status and things like that. You will be better off if your organization is anything but homogenous. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, and you're giving me so many ideas of all of the sort of initiatives that maybe the groups in this call can take to create some bridges so that we're not so heavily reliant on just who right? Creating more internships, opportunities like that. So thank you. And I wanted to, since this is kind of the topic of the night, I wanted to open up this question. If there's anything else you want to add on to Chissy's response in terms of anything she maybe missed in terms of what is creating challenges to having more inclusive, equitable music environments? I mean, that was a perfect answer, so maybe not.
I think for me, it's a team sport. It's like everyone who's paying attention to this panel, like you obviously are already aware of these issues. I think it's also about educating, our colleagues, male, female, everyone about these same issues and really everyone rising up on the same wave together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I totally agree. We need to be, building bigger communities and welcoming more folks in and then, rising together. Absolutely. So I'm going to jump to Mia. Mia, what has inspired your activism? What inspired you to do the work that you're doing?
Right. Well, for me, just starting at such a young age, I was in some really amazing rooms, probably from the age of 18. And recently in January, when I was interviewing at all these amazing companies at like WME and Paradigm and Universal, Atlantic, and so on, when I was in these waiting rooms and even these big weed out, phase one interview rooms, I was in a room of about 200 people repeatedly. And I looked around the room and I noticed that maybe 10 of those people, 10 of those hundreds of people were POCs. And that really bothered me. I mean, I know I was so fortunate to be there, but you had diversity and inclusion officers going into these interviews and kind of doing their 5-minute spiel about what they're doing to succeed. But clearly, if you look around the room in that moment, what they were saying, it's clearly not true. So that really bothered me. And in January, I kind of thought about starting the Color Music Initiative, but I really wanted to spend a lot of time and energy into really perfecting this. And so I bounced it off of a few of my mentors and professors. And when I graduated, I knew it was the perfect time to start this, especially with the George Floyd incident that happened at the end of May. And so that's kind of when the Color Music Collective really started going. And it honestly moved quite rapidly from the first panel to now. We have a blog. We have so many other conglomerates within the Color Music Collective that have really taken off quite rapidly. And so many partnerships have come from that, Music Biz being our first partnership. So for me, it was probably just pure frustration from just applying to jobs and walking into these rooms and having it not look like the world I walk in every single day.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so that's like the perfect segue from this idea of we need to be creating bigger and better communities, right? You're hosting these panels to expose more and more people to what's going on, the variety of individuals who work in the music industry that we maybe don't get to see every day, right? And you're also potentially exposing young folks who are interested in the industry to see that they could do it too, right? To see a model of themselves in those panels. So I'm curious if you have so Color of Music, if you're unfamiliar, does a lot of really incredible virtual programming and panels, inviting all sorts of different voices from the music industry in. What is on the horizon for you right now? Like, do you have any panels coming up that you're super excited about?
Yes, I'm really excited for a panel that we actually have coming up on Monday, which basically discusses post-COVID, what are festivals and concerts going to do to ensure the safety of not only the audience, but also the artists themselves and the production team behind them. So I'm really excited for that. It's an incredible lineup, of course, all POCs and LGBTQ music execs. So I'm really excited for that. And also we've been talking about, post-COVID, what can we do to engage more with our audience? And a lot of the panelists, whenever they finish a panel, they always say like, I really wish we could do something like this in person. This was so great. What can we do next? And so we've been talking a lot about doing an in-person conference because that's what really helped me throughout my college career, going to a lot of networking conferences and seeing in-person panels and networking with them for an entire 5 days or even a weekend. I really took advantage of those when I was in college. So I would really like to do something like that, but obviously we have to wait to see what happens. But I would really like us to focus on inviting only POC students and LGBTQ students and also music execs as well, and basically doing what we do virtually, but in person.
Yes, I love it. And I'm happy that you sort of embraced the virtual change too, though, because I think that we are really seeing some groups like yours flourishing in this space. I think this panel would not have been possible if we were doing it in real life in terms of us all being all over the country. So I'm excited to see how you jump straight into the real life world too. Taylor, She Is the Music was started in order to give women more opportunities to learn and make connections in the music industry. Jumping off to what Mia was just talking about, how did the idea specifically of the Songwriters Camp, we were all very inspired by this, come about, and how do you think it's or have you seen it affecting the careers of the folks who are coming through the camp? Do you have any like amazing stories to share of that?
Yeah, actually, it's fun. So She Is the Music's been around for, I think, like 2.5 years now. It's all kind of a blur because it happened very quickly and became very intense once we realized we were onto something. But we saw, there was a study that Annenberg did that broke down, 2% of producers on the Hot 100 are female. I don't remember the exact stats, but they're pretty dismal. And as a publisher, I was kind of like, oh my God, like, what can I directly do to kind of change the situation? And everyone who was involved with She Is the Music very early on were like, well, we just need to put more women in sessions, and in sessions with other women. And that kind of morphed into, well, what if we did a writing camp that was all women? And to be completely honest, I mean, you see the stats and you kind of internalize them, but until you really experience it, it's a different thing. So I put that first camp together, and it was in New York, and it was with Alicia Keys. And I remember thinking like, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to find enough producers. And that was what really like drove it home for me, was when I actually was kind of like, okay, like it's going to be all women, all female engineers, producers, writers, artists in this room. And then I actually was like, I don't know if I can fill every single slot. That's when I was kind of like, this is now my mission. And actually from that first camp, one of the things that was really incredible was like, I organized this like welcome dinner for everyone because it was in New York. A lot of people flew in, and, I just thought it might be nice to break the ice. And these were all very well-known, established writers. And we're all sitting around the dinner table, and everyone's like, oh, like, I know your discography. Like, I know everything about your career. Like, all these women were fans of each other. And I was talking to one of them, and I was just like, it's so crazy to me that you've never worked. And she was like, no one's ever thought to put me in the room with another woman, like on purpose. And it was a light bulb moment for me. And I was just like, we have something here. So what's been most gratifying for me is knowing that I've helped create those relationships. And now I know that a writer that I introduced to a producer, I know that they work together all the time. Introducing artists to their favorite female songwriter, like that's when I feel like I've really, made a difference.
Yeah, that's so incredible. And I just love thinking about this future where that sort of connection is not a novelty, right? Where that's just a totally normal, everyday thing, that these folks find each other and get to work together by choice, and not because it's some like, I don't know, pointed directive of like, this one music company is like, we decided to care about women today, so we're gonna like put you guys together. Like, I really think that initiatives like yours can like get us to that place, right? Yeah. So I wanted to toss it to Brit, and then I'm going to pass the mic to Christina for sort of the next like topic of questions. But Brit, since you have a bigger, sort of a wider scope of the music industry in general, being that you cover it and being that you've written about it for years, are there any areas of the music industry that you are seeing actually doing a good job, that are actually like really taking this initiative seriously and are trying to build wider communities?
I would say that in terms of specific areas of like the music community that I see, I feel like there are people who are, maybe like smaller communities. I'm thinking of like, people in like the DIY scene in particular who are, for back when there were, shows and things like that, establishing rules, like for their houses before people could come in, deliberately, creating more inclusive lineups, even, in fact, sort of having a house or a space that is specifically focused on, people of color. And so, everyone who lives there is a person of color. Everyone who performs there is a person of color, sometimes going further and saying, only, Black or brown performers, only Black performers, only, queer performers and things like that. So I feel that a lot of what I, personally have seen has developed in those kind of smaller fringe communities. I think there's a lot of, areas where people are sort of, making statements and making pledges and doing things like that, but has it actually come to fruition? I don't necessarily know. A lot of times we see things sort of begin to establish, after there are sort of major events that happen, or there's, huge, sort of calls and pushes for it. For example, like, after the uprising that began after the, murder of George Floyd. But, as it is in many other industries, people sort of, make these initiatives as things are really kind of hot and popping. And then when, other things start going on in the news and other things get people's attention, people tend to then revert back to what they were doing before. And so you're seeing that, play out in terms of even just, on certain streaming services, the month or two after the uprisings began, there was lots of, promotion of Black artists, and not just from a, Juneteenth perspective, right? But then by August, it was like as if none of that had even happened, right? So you see it kind of, developing early, and then do they continue to, stick to what they said they were going to do? No. And so that's what, the real issue is sort of, in my opinion, like, how do we, not only sort of make an effort once, but, continue to have sustainable practices that really, focus on, diversity and inclusivity as it relates to, the music industry and music culture.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just jump in real quick?
Definitely.
I just wanted to say, like, Brit, what you just said is so on point. And it's really important to point out, especially this year, because so many people are seeing this for the first time. Look at your social media. In the summer, everyone's social media was like, if you're not posting about social justice and Black lives and, George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, you're out. And now it's like everything's gone back to normal. If that's happening with our friends who are social justice warriors, if you may, what makes us think that's not happening with within the industry and within businesses? And the whole point of, I think, what we all do here, or what we're all trying to accomplish, is to move the industry away from being reactionary. It shouldn't take Breonna Taylor's death, murder, and George Floyd's murders for people to understand that something is happening in the world. It shouldn't take murder. It shouldn't take murder for people to understand that when you talk over a Black woman in the workplace, that's just trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. And what does that actually mean? It really, for me also, I want to move into a utopia where diversity and inclusion isn't a thing we have to remind people of. It's just how things operate. And it's so important, that what Mia is doing and what Brit is doing, what Taylor is doing and what I am doing become the norm, so that we don't have to exist. And like, that's what I want. That's what my goal is. But I just had to jump in there because Brit, on point.
Yeah,
it's very, very important.
It's exactly, I think of myself, I've even, in those like month or 2 months, after everything had happened, I had a couple editors who were like, well, do you know of anyone who's like creating protest songs who are doing so-and-so, or, like, what, Black artists are you featuring? And I'm like, I always write about Black people I always write about brown people in my, that's what I'm known for, right? Like, people know me specifically. It's like, they're like, you are, you're the music person now for the Tribune, and you've always written like this. I didn't need, the, very public murder of a George Floyd or a Breonna Taylor to do that, right? but they still had this like instinct to like, just kind of almost like a scrambling, like, well, we got to cover all of our bases. And I flat out was like, well, you don't have to worry about that from me, because that's always been my base. It has been to, write from this perspective, as a Black, woman, journalist, right? So it's unfortunate. And they sometimes people don't even realize that, like, it's like the content that you are even, I don't know. It's something that's been really kind of, I think, bothersome to me. And even, even as you had said about like looking at the Instagram feeds, I can always, I kind of scroll back and you can kind of see like kind of right when the uprising started. And then there's like all of these like Black and brown faces. And then you can kind of tell like right around when like maybe like August 15th hit, and then people just like didn't care about it anymore. And it went back to, kind of how things were before. And so, for me, the goal is, like I'm only one person, right? So it's like, what can I do as a, journalist, as an editor, to, not just be the sole person who is, always being, always writing from a diverse perspective, always being inclusive in terms of the topics I cover. How can I kind of work to make sure that my peers, as well as like the next generation of young writers who are coming up, one, get as many opportunities as possible, but also two, that they have not only like the chance to write themselves, but to talk about the artists and creators who are influencing and inspiring them, and who also happen to come from these diverse backgrounds.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for continuing to do that work, and for being, I again, to this point of like, we want this to become just the norm, just commonplace. We want to not, I'm really enjoying talking to y'all right now, but we don't want to be doing these panels forever, right? Like, we want to be to a place where it doesn't have to be this like epic conversation. And I think the only way that we're going to get there is sort of building off of what each of you have said, is not only creating the spaces where the right people are in the spaces, right, and they have access to the opportunities and the jobs, but further building it into the DNA of each of these music companies, of these venues and festivals, so that it's not even something they have to think about, right? That it's just in the way that they function and the way that they move. And so I think that transitions really well to our next topic, which is sort of where we are currently, like this kind of worldwide standstill, and how I've seen a lot of folks writing about how, coming out of COVID, we don't want there to go back to normal, right? Like, we want to take this opportunity to really do some introspective work as a community, as people involved in music, and come out better than we were before. So I'm gonna hand the mic over to Christina, because she has some questions about that.
Again, so to start off, like Maggie said, we're going to talk about COVID-related questions. We are getting a little close on time, so we'll update you all on how that goes. But again, so Chissy, have you seen any changes or growth in music streaming during the pandemic, and how has the pandemic affected your marketing strategy?
I'm going to say changes. Growth is to be seen, or even dips. There were a lot of articles that came out earlier in the pandemic, April, May, that was like, streaming is fine. Like, people are still consuming music. Totally, for sure. However, we have to think about where that data comes from. Is it, I think it was Drake released a new album earlier this year. Was it The Weeknd? And then also like, Beyonce and Taylor Swift, all of that impacts the entire music economy, right? And we're not talking about indie artists and, the middle of the line artists who make a living, but aren't superstars, who aren't Ariana Grande. And it's really important that when we're analyzing that data, we're taking that into account, because literally Ariana Grande can release one album and the entire economy swings in one way. So changes remains to be seen with regard to consumption numbers, but the music industry is so archaic, right? Even when it comes to pulling data, how much has this artist streamed? How much has it sold? The systems that we use are so old and no one can figure it out. We have great tech in the tech industry that we are lucky to be able to bring into the music industry here or there. But the one thing that this, pandemic has taught us is that we have got to be crafty. We have to be quick on our feet. And I'll say the number one change that we saw this year, obviously, virtual events and just changing the way that people are communicating with their fans. How are people bringing their fans in? How are you, connecting with your consumer? Why is it that more people are streaming catalog now than they were before the pandemic? Is it anxiety? Is it a feeling that there's closeness to home? And I hope that when we get out of this pandemic, we keep that drive. We keep that youthful idea of don't ever get too comfortable, because we never know how these things are going to be. And, specifically in streaming, we're seen as the leaders in the music industry because it's digital, because it's new, because it hasn't been around very long. But what nobody will tell you is that nobody knows what they're doing. All of us are making it up as we go. The data, we're looking at numbers and we're just making up a story to go with it. We're trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work. There's no answer. There's just adjusting. So I really hope that the entire industry as a whole gets comfortable with adjusting, because that's what we've had to do this year. And it's really been hard. I hate this year, but it's a really amazing challenge that we have, and it only makes us better.
Definitely. I think that's very true. Anything this pandemic has taught us is that the only thing we can count on in life is change. So for the next question, Brit, since you follow music so closely, would you say you've seen an increase in music releases over the last 8 months, or has the pandemic put the music industry essentially to a halt?
There's definitely been a decrease in the number of releases, since the pandemic really started, especially in the early months in particular. A lot of albums got delayed. A lot of, labels didn't know how to market with the loss of so many of their traditional, venues or outlets for that marketing. The loss of live shows, then made it so people were like, how do we, continue the momentum of this album or this EP without the ability for people to see the performer live. So that definitely put like a stop on things. Some records were delayed a couple of months, thinking that like if we, in 6 weeks things would be, kind of calm down. They obviously didn't, because we didn't have any national strategy in terms of addressing the pandemic. And so then after, a month or two, some artists just eventually then were like, let me just like release this album. Let me just, do something. A lot of, it was, for some like larger artists, like it was okay, right? Like a Dua Lipa or a Lady Gaga, it was okay. But, I knew that a lot of like indie artists in particular, their albums were delayed, and, they don't have the kind of built-in fan bases that allows them to, even after a couple months of delay, just sort of release an album without very much, promo and, still be successful. And so much of their money kind of comes from that like touring, aspect as well. I think, the other thing that also sort of affected that as well is, the fact that, a lot of publications really kind of killed their arts and culture coverage. A lot of places folded, a lot of, journalists and writers were laid off. A lot of sort of, shows were shut down, just a lot of sort of like venues for artists to continue, the promotion or the licensing of their music really kind of dwindled. And so I think that affected the decisions about whether or not people were going to, release music. We're starting to see that kind of mindset sort of go away, unfortunately, because people are realizing that this pandemic, unfortunately, is going to be here for much longer in this country in particular. And so it's sort of becoming a thing where it's like, well, how long can we, continue to hold on to this music? And it's not the sort of thing like a movie, which is very much, they're just gonna, I don't know, keep holding off on those for as long as possible. A lot of artists that I've talked to, they were sort of just like, you know what, like, I just want it out in the world. I just want to, you know, and when I'm able to, you know, tour, I'm able to tour, and that's what it's going to be. But, you know, so they're just starting to unleash these records and, you know, see how it goes. So yeah, that's definitely been a major issue, both on the sort of, you know, major record label side, as well as in the indie and even like the DIY world.
Definitely. I know, at least with, you know, indie artists, like you were saying, coronavirus, I know a lot of smaller artists get almost all of their income from live shows.
Right. Yeah. And not having a festival season like really kills a lot of, you know, small artists. Not having a touring season really kills like their opportunities to what would essentially, you know, they would make their money for the next year, right? Is playing all of these shows or playing select shows, or, you know, I know some artists who are, you know, maybe smaller or indie or whatever, but they would just kind of really like bounce from festival to festival to festival. And, you know, they could make a nice, you know, I mean, it's not like they're like rolling in the money, but, you know, at least like enough money to have a kind of comfortable middle class, you know, foundation. They can, you know, have an apartment to rent, they can do all these things. And now it's sort of like, you know, what do you do when that huge sort of chunk of your money has completely been wiped out, and not just wiped out, but like, who knows when it'll come back, you know, will it ever come back, right? So it's been really tricky, and the ripple effects, you know, we continue to see as well. So
Definitely. Thank you for that. It's, you know, really insightful, and I know a lot of people who are tuning in today are trying to figure out, you know, where can we get new revenue streams from, as, you know, smaller artists. So Mia, next question. So Color Music Collective has been thriving. We are watching and we love it. What have you done in order to cope with these difficult times? And where do you see the Color Music Collective going beyond COVID?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I started really at the height of things after the George Floyd incident, when there was protests all around the world internationally, and then soon Juneteenth, Blackout Tuesday, when that happened. So for me, I was honestly trying to figure out if I should wait till later in the summer to first launch, or just start it now. And what me and my co-founder decided was, it's best to start these conversations now, especially in the music industry, where we weren't seeing any of it for years. And even when it was part of the conversation, it still was nothing. I mean, we had Blackout Tuesday that was founded by these two wonderful women from Atlantic, but we haven't seen a lot since then. And so I really wanted to start this when it was sort of the heightened part of the summer. But I sadly, like, I mean, wonderfully, we haven't really struggled at all for the summer, because we have a lot of allies that also want to educate themselves, especially when it comes to the music business, which is predominantly white executives. So we've really taken advantage of our platform, and my co-founder and I go through a lot of universities, just kind of telling them like, what can they do, how can they apply themselves during this time, and also how they can educate themselves with resources, virtual resources like this, and conversations like this. So luckily we haven't struggled at all, and we've definitely been coping really well during these times. But in the future, I really would like us to take these conversations in person, and have live conversations in person throughout multiple cities. As like Tristy said, not everyone can afford to travel to cities like LA and New York and Nashville. So it's really important for us to go to these cities where there are these music business programs that they can afford a small trip to go to LA or New York. So that's really what we would like to do, is go through smaller rural cities and have these conversations.
Absolutely. I know when I first saw you guys, it was like you just came out of nowhere, you took over the scene, and it's just so great seeing someone from DC, I will say, just, you know, come in and, you know, change the industry from the inside out. So next question, Taylor. With the success of artists getting discovered online, given the coronavirus, how do you picture the process of A&R changing over the next year, 2 years or so?
You know, obviously, with COVID, we're not able to go to shows. We're not able to see people perform. But people were being discovered primarily online before COVID too. But what I think I'm personally starting to see is, this is, I guess, just my personal like A&R strategy, but I just feel like, you can kind of put on a face when you're online, and it may be different when you start to perform. And it's been a little bit difficult for me to kind of get a true sense of artistry from somebody when it's only, through live streams or through whatever they have up on Spotify or TikTok or something. So it's going to be, I wish I had a better answer, but I think it's going to be really interesting to see kind of the shift of people who maybe felt more comfortable putting music out because they know that they're not going to have to perform it, versus some people who I think are just itching to get back on stage. So I think it's going to be a really interesting kind of time once things get back to normal. And maybe they won't. Maybe there are going to be a lot of artists and a lot of fans who enjoy artists that never perform. So I think it's, kind of opening up opportunities for people to get even more creative with how they put their art out there.
Yeah. And speaking of opportunities, do you have any suggestions for ways that women can connect with other industry creatives during this pandemic?
Yeah, I've seen, it's been really cool, actually. We did, I did a panel a couple weeks ago. I have no sense of time. So it could have been last year, but I think it was like last week. And there were all these women in kind of the chat of the panel exchanging email addresses. And they actually came up with, during the panel, a Google Doc, and everyone put in their email address and was just like, reach out to me if you want to collaborate. So I think I've seen a lot of people using Discord to connect. I mean, the standard Instagram, Twitter, DM still works. But it's been cool to see people connect, especially on like new ways, like on Twitch, like seeing people connect in the chat of a Twitch that they're watching. So that's been like really cool and kind of inspiring that people are just putting themselves out there like that. It's been really fun.
I haven't heard of Twitch yet, or like connecting through.
Oh man, you got a whole new world.
Great to know. Maybe that's where I'll go.
Yeah.
So Maggie, I think we're gonna switch to the social media questions. So we had people submit questions online. Would you like to start with the first one?
Yeah. So I'm going to kind of toss this out to the group, and, anyone who feels compelled can jump in, because I really think that each of you has a unique perspective to offer to this question. And I think it kind of goes off of what Taylor was just speaking about in terms of how folks are putting out their music right now. So the question comes from This Is Valentine on Instagram. I have recently graduated in contemporary music, performance and vocals. I have been teaching and recording, yet I feel so unmotivated and lost. What advice do you have for keeping up motivation in such a static time? So I think this question really gets to that point of like, how do we make our community more sustainable, where something like this doesn't just like completely like slam the door shut for people? So yeah, any of you, any advice for This Is Valentine on how to keep with it?
I would say, outside of like my like journalism, I do a lot of creative nonfiction writing. And the first maybe 2 to 4 months of the pandemic, I couldn't get like anything out. Like it was just, my brain was just like, it wasn't happening. Like I could do the journalism, like that was, because in some ways too, it was also for survival. I was like, I feel really blessed to still be able to write, so like, let me like get this work done and have something to focus on. But when it kind of came to the more kind of personal creative stuff, I just really had like a block. And I think that one of the important things that artists should remember is that even though some aspects of our life have started to go back to normal, or people are feeling or trying to make it be normal, probably sooner than they should, right? the thing that, to remember is that we are still in a pandemic. And so because of that, one, it's okay to not be creative in the way that you were before, because we're in unprecedented times. Some people, they can hunker down and just write an album. A Taylor Swift can do something like that. But, a lot of other people, it's much more challenging. They get stimulated from being around other people. They get stimulated from being out in the world, from seeing things, doing things, etc. So one, I would say, like, give yourself, rather not give yourself, but, be patient with yourself and give yourself time. Sometimes it's the forcing of things that gives us such a mental block. And so I know, I always call, procrastination a form of like pre-writing, where basically, it's just my brain kind of working through the things that I want to say. And I, would have those times where I'm like, okay, I'm going to sit down and try to write and try to get all the things out. And then like nothing comes out and I'm so distracted. And it's just like, it's like your head is just not in that place right now. Like, and it's like, girl, you just gotta, like, the more you sit here, the more frustrated you're going to feel. And so you need to like go do something else. And then what happens is that, maybe I'll go to sleep early, I'll wake up early all of a sudden, and then like the words are there and I can like get like 3,000, 4,000 words out, in like an hour or two, right? So be patient with yourself. We're in a weird time and no one could ever predict how you respond creatively to the madness that we continue to live in this country. I think the other thing too is, begin to, learn or treat yourself to, different forms of creative muses, right? So one of the ways that I used to always find to be really inspirational, for me in terms of writing, was to like go to this one cafe in the River West area of Chicago called Iguana Cafe. It's like a very Mediterranean cafe. There's always like lots of Greek men there, like talking. I don't know. I just found it so fat. I was like, I love this place. They have $5 glasses of wine. Like, this is perfect, right? And I could spend like 6 hours there, and like I would write like these 5,000, 6,000 word essays. I'm like, yeah, this is great. And it's like, now I can't go and like hang out at that place, right? Like that place is off limits to me. And that restaurant was it was actually the last place I went to before like Chicago's and Illinois' like stay-at-home order, kind of came down. So I'm like, I'm glad that was like the last place I went to, because it's one of my favorite places in the city. But that was a source of inspiration for me. So now it's like, okay, what are other things that maybe give you, clarity, insight, a sense of creativity that you hadn't known of before, but now you really enjoy. So maybe, test things out, be curious, do things that you maybe wouldn't have done before. And you might find that the muse will come to you in those ways, right? Like I was never like a runner, and then I became a runner, during this pandemic, because I needed to get out of the house, and I was like, well, let's try this thing we've never done before. And then on those runs, I'd be like, oh, I know exactly what I'm gonna write. Okay, this is great. Like, and then I would just literally be like running back to my apartment so that I could like get it down, So, you may be surprised by the things that you find inspirational, and you should sort of lean into those opportunities to do things that are different than what you were doing before.
For me, I also work at a recording studio in LA called the Village Recorder, and we have so many artists that are coming in and out. And one thing that I've really noticed is artists are doing less recording in the studio, and they're actually taking advantage of that space to do jam sessions with a producer, a songwriter, or just the artists themselves. They immerse themselves in a creative environment. And also, we have multiple studios in the recording studio as well. So you see artists going from one studio to the next, just saying like, hey, like I just wrote this ballad, like, what do you think? So I think it's also about immersing yourself in a creative environment, like what Brit said, and seeing what happens, and being around people that support you and they want to see you succeed.
Also,
oh, sorry.
go ahead.
I think this is true for any time, not necessarily even just COVID, but like if you're an artist, you're a songwriter, like you need to be living, you need to be out there like experiencing things so that you have something to write about. So, if you're not feeling super inspired right now, just be kind to yourself and give yourself a break, and, exactly what Britt was saying. There's so many amazing ways to feel inspired, and not like, make yourself feel defeated because you didn't write a song today.
Another thing that is not just pandemic related, but we live and work in a society that rewards go, go, go all the time and doesn't think of rest as a right, thinks of rest as a reward. And we need to stop doing that. Yes, you have to work your ass off. You have to prove yourself. You have to do all of these things. But number one, let yourself rest physically and mentally. It's so important. And don't let anybody make you feel guilty about it. I can easily stay in bed on a Saturday until 2 p.m. and feel nothing about it because I need a break. Running, working out, physical activity can make you really tired, but mental strain also has a physical impact on your body. And sometimes doing nothing is the best thing that you can do for your creativity and your mental wellness. And on that note, if it's available to you, therapy is really important. If you can do it. Obviously, it's not, we live in a society that doesn't, think of healthcare as a right. So, unfortunately, it's not available to everyone, but if it is, I really recommend it because, something that my therapist said to me last week was, you're becoming an adult at a crazy time. And I'm turning 30 next week, so I'm not that young, but like this area of becoming an adult and growing up and getting to know myself, because who I was 5 years ago, like 25, I don't know who that person is, and not in a bad way. It just feels so long ago for me. And this year and this era of life, whatever 10-year period we're in, is hard. It's really hard. And getting to know yourself while the world is burning around you is also not normal. And we need to normalize understanding that this is not normal and it's okay. Talk about it, talk about your anxieties, talk about your depression, feel it, and let yourself rest. It's really, really important. And all of that can also help creativity. It can help mental wellness, even if it's just, oh my God, someone said something that I thought only I felt. And now I realize that other people feel it too.
Yes, thank you. I feel like that has been the role of TikTok for me lately, is that feeling of like I'm connected in this very minute way that I thought only I felt this way. So it's not a guilty pleasure for me anymore. I'm singing its praises. But I love just reiterating this idea that like in order to keep going, in order to be sustainable, we actually need to be taking the time to rest and to recover, because I think that we could see that reflected in the music industry as well, right? We were just trying so hard to like get everything done all the time that when our main avenues for reaching people, like we were saying, like live performances, festivals, when that was no longer on the table, there was this moment of, well, there's no other option. Like, what do we do? And it took a while for the industry to sort of catch up. Now it has, and it's booming, and we have so many live streaming concerts, so many other initiatives to keep people engaged. But if we're not taking that time to take care of ourselves, we're really missing out on the sort of big picture on how to keep it going. So I want to be thoughtful of time. And so we have a bunch of more really incredible questions. And maybe if y'all are feeling so inspired, you can like post them on your social medias as well, whatever you want to do. I just want to say thank you again so much. And I really wanted to close on a sort of uplifting, forward thinking note. And I was really inspired by something Britt wrote about seeing Blessed Madonna set shortly thereafter the 2016 election results came through, and that being a really big source of self-care. So going back to Shissy's point too of like taking care of ourselves through music. So I wanted to ask y'all what you are listening to right now that's not just giving you life, but also like helping you feel connected to your community, to, people who are far away, and so on.
Well, I mean, I've always been a deep house kind of girl. I'm from Chicago, so that's very me. but I got like really into deep house, especially this, you know, spring and like summer, where it was just, I mean, I was like listening to like, just like hard drive and like, you know, just all these like over and over and over again. And I was, you know, one, it was like, I was thinking, okay, I'm clearly missing like going to, you know, clubs and those kind of spaces and dancing, right? You know, before all this happened in like last December, I got really sick and I had like a lot of nerve damage and I wasn't able to kind of move parts of like the left side of my body, like my arms and my, you know, legs and stuff. And so I hadn't danced in like months, right? And then like right at the beginning of March, I was starting to feel better and I was able to go out, and then the pandemic came. And so then all of that, like, I was like, well, I got like one, you know, nice out, you know, night out in the club after like 4 or 5 months. So I've been really listening to just like a lot of like, you know, early 90s, like deep house that's made me just feel really kind of, I don't know, nostalgic in a way, even though I'm only like, you know, 33. Listening to, I got really into like a lot of, I mean, I've always loved disco, but again, listening to like a lot of just like really great, some like obscure disco, things like that. I always listen to Prince as a form of comfort for myself. So I just went real deep, like all April was just like all Prince all the time, you know, just like, yeah, listening to like Seven on repeat. Like I'm sure my neighbors are like, this crazy like psycho just listens to, because I'll listen to the same song like 20 times in a row and then I'm like, okay, like on to the next one, you know. So yeah, so a lot of that was really great for me. And then I just listened to a lot of Aretha Franklin as well. I don't know, so I just, a lot of older stuff was really just giving me a lot of comfort, reminding me of my childhood, my parents, my grandparents. Yeah.
On the tune of mental wellness, I noticed earlier this year for the first time that when I'm in moments of high anxiety and high stress, I listen to the things that I already know and love, lots of catalog. So for me, it's like things that I listened to when I was growing up, things that I listened to when I was an emo kid in high school, just on repeat. So a lot of my playlists are just stuff that I listened to, I've been listening to for the past 15, 20 years. And in this pandemic, I've learned it's really difficult for me to listen to new music, really hard. I just can't do it. And I have here and there, but it's really difficult. So twofold answer: catalog, things that make me feel warm and fuzzy because I'm a high anxiety person. And also my ponytail princess, Ariana Grande's new album, Positions, is great. And I love her. And she makes me feel happy because her music is fun. This album calls on like old school R&B and I love it.
It's funny. I've been doing the exact same thing. I feel like super nostalgic, but my criteria is a little different. So I've been listening to like stuff from my youth, from my emo kid days, and also music that I did not work on. I do not want to listen to any of my friends. I don't want to listen to anything that I personally have signed. Like that's my 9 to 5, and we're chill. What I have been listening to a lot of is My Chemical Romance, Blink-182, Taking Back Sunday, and Green Day. And that's what I do now. I literally strained my neck headbanging to My Chemical Romance. Not a joke. So
literally me last week. Also Paramore.
Yeah, also that. There's just a wealth of pop punk from the early 2000s. That's just, it's great.
Mine is actually pretty much the same thing. I haven't been listening to a lot of the top 40 music. Once in a while, because obviously I work in a recording studio, when an artist like JoJo comes in and they say like, oh, she released a new album, you know, I'll listen to it, which it is actually really good. So I highly recommend listening to that. But I've mostly just been listening to a lot of like Red Hot Chili Peppers, like Guns N' Roses, definitely more leaning towards the classic rock. I saw that Chris Cornell like released a single actually, and gosh, that made me really sad because like obviously that was like years ago, and he's like one of my favorite artists of all time, probably one of my favorite guitarists. And when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, really now? That's like probably the most like recent song I've listened to that's come out, but I've been really going back into the classic rock.
I want to extend, for fun, I want to extend the question to Christina too. I'll give my answer. Weirdly enough, I've never been a fan before this of like live recordings of shows, but I've been catching myself listening to or like watching Tiny Desk concerts. And I think it is that like desire to be in a room with people and to be like consuming music together that I miss. But I similarly have been digging deep into the nostalgia for sure and like listening to a lot of, weirdly enough, like high school punk music, like Dead Kennedys and stuff like that I haven't thought about in forever, but I'm just like, it's giving me so much energy right now. Christina, do you want to take us home? What is giving you life right now?
Yeah. Well, it's so funny because when Chissy said that she can't listen to any new music, I have not been able to listen to anything new. And I thought something was wrong with me. I was like, I'm a terrible music person. Like, how can I call myself a music lover when like I can't even I used to discover new music all the time, and it is that place of anxiety, but like wanting to, listen to something familiar. But so I organize my music by season, and I have a playlist for every season since 2010, and I've been going through my seasonal playlist, and it's, for me, every time I listen to like, let's say winter 2015, it like immediately takes me back to that place. Kind of sounds weirder now that I say it out loud, but I've definitely been going back.
Amazing. I love it.
Yeah, like listening to, something that puts me in my freshman year of college or something instead of, where we are right now. But I guess to name names, The Killers, I'm a big fan of. Strokes, also a big fan of. But a lot of just, random artists. I usually don't even know the name of the song, but, just whatever brings me back to those times.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And again, thank you all for sitting with us for an hour and talking about, solving all the problems of the world via music. And I just want to say I not only appreciate your time, but also the work that y'all are doing to make this community bigger and better and stronger. And I seriously cannot wait to see where y'all take it next. So thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.